Hey guys, Carmine here. Quick announcement for the channel and podcast. I'm finally opening up the membership option for my channel and bringing over all exclusive content that was only ever available on Patreon to YouTube. I know a lot of you guys have told me Patreon's app is hard to use and doesn't work well on mobile, so hopefully this is an alternative. For those of you who are still supporting me on Patreon, don't you guys worry. Nothing changes for you. In fact, you all still get everything and more. And actually, Patreon, you get a bit more for your support, mainly because YouTube's membership has limitations on what I can offer. So if you're someone who just cares about the exclusive videos and nothing else, then membership is for you. If you want a bit more for your support, definitely check out Patreon. Right now, there's only one tier. It's $1, and any future perks will still be only $1. I will never ask any more than that. And yeah, so if you enjoy the channel and podcast and want to support it, definitely check it out. The join button is right below the video. I'll leave more information in the description below and a pinned comment. And yes, I'll also be uploading the infamous episode 12, where we go into how Preston's channel was almost deleted and the drama involving him in the community. So, yeah. Thank you for your time. Enjoy the video. By the way, did you hear that George R.R. Martin gave us an update on the upcoming new book? Another update, or I think it's the same update. I don't remember, but in it he kind of confirms.
Another update where he says he's doing work, but there's still no book.
Mm-hmm. And in it, he says, he ends the update by saying, "Me and the Frog are headed back to Westeros." Now, some people took that to thinking that Quentyn Martell is alive because he's been called a frog due to his looks.
Right.
Some would argue that's what it was, but he does post a GIF of Kermit the Frog typing away on his typewriter. So, what do you think on this? Do you think it's a clue by George that Quentyn may be alive after all?
Um, I don't know. I mean, look, I think that there's a lot of evidence put in there that Quentin is alive. I think that George R. Martin left himself the out. He didn't want to paint himself into a corner, so he left all of these clues that Quentin is alive, just in case he wants him to be alive. If he doesn't want Quentin to be alive, then he can ignore all of the little clues because that's just his
Mm-hmm.
writing style. He calls it gardening, where he like places a bunch of like items for foreshadowing, and then later on, maybe he's going to use them or not. Kind of like the the uh, the religious extremists that got sent to the wall. Like sometimes they don't pan out, and then sometimes they do, and everybody's like, "What a genius!" You know, like like like, oh my gosh, like Miri Mazdur mentioned Marwyn in book 1, and then Marwyn appears in book 5, and you're like, okay, yeah, that's great, but there's a million people that were mentioned that didn't come back, like Al Ardim. But the but the so could this be? So the problem is that one, like, there's the Kermit the Frog thing, but two, like, George R. R. Martin is also obsessed with a different frog uh, called Froggy the Gremlin. Do you know about Froggy the Gremlin?
I do not know about Froggy the Gremlin.
So George R. R. Martin, when he was a kid, used to watch this children's show where one of the characters was called Froggy the Gremlin, and Froggy had the ability of mind control over people. He was a very creepy little frog, but they bring out this frog, and then this person would be talking, and then all of a sudden the frog would kind of go like, let's say guy comes out and he's like, "Oh, Froggy, look, I just baked this pie," and then the frog would go, "Smash it in your face," and then he'd be like, "Oh," oh no," and then all of a sudden he'd smash it in his face, and the kids would all like laugh and he'd go, "Ah ha 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 ha." Like, for some reason, like, this frog was able to get into people's minds and plant uh, ideas, um, which, by the way, is like a huge George R. R. Martin thing. Like, later on, a lot of his stories are about mind control. I think Ice and Fire is very much about mind control, and
Hmm.
and so he still is obsessed with this, like, Froggy the Gremlin character years and years later. Um, I think the show was called Andy and the Gang or something. It was this black and white children's show way back in the day. and I think it was local to the New York area. Like you didn't even get it in other places. And so so he's obsessed with frogs in general. So he's got Froggy the Gremlin, and sometimes when he posts blog posts, he'll be like, hey, everybody. And that's actually like Froggy the Gremlin's saying. So who knows if it's that or if it's Kermit because there was a Kermit the Frog in the GIF or what. But yeah, no. I mean, it'd be nice if it was Quentyn Martell too, because Quentyn's nickname is the Frog.
Well, you have a whole theory that Quentyn's alive, which I've never understood like how that's possible, because in his point of view chapter, he himself says his hand, his hand, all of him was burning.
Right.
And generally you don't survive. Even Dany is not really immune to fire. And when he tries to whip one of the dragons, the whip catches on fire.
Yeah.
So what are your thoughts? And not even that, but when he is like burned to a crisp, one of his companions, I forget if it's the Yornwood guy or Drinkwater, they're holding him. And even Barristan in like several chapters over says it took him 3 days to die.
Yeah.
And he goes down there because they arrested the Yornwood guy. I forgot his name. It's
Archibald.
So it's like right. And I forgot the other man's name, but it's Drinkwater.
Garrus Drinkwater. Yeah.
Thank you. They even confirmed that he's gone. And Barristan tries to make a deal with him to go deal with the Tattered Prince. So,
well, let's start with how the chapter ends. The chapter ends with Quentyn screaming, and then the chapter stops. So we don't see Quentyn die. He screams, but he's not dead. In fact, he supposedly dies 3 days later. So George R.R. Martin could have gone into a whole bunch of agony and described him burning and confirmed that this dragon had burned him. But he decided to cut the chapter off. So George R.R. Martin had a conscious effort, deliberately cut the information from the viewer to make things a mystery. Right. Later on, when Archibald Ironwood is describing what happens, he tells the story, and then also in his story, he cuts out that period of time and jumps ahead to some other information. And so twice our author cuts out and blacks out that period. I mean, and it's very deliberate. So our author didn't want us to know or see Quentyn dying. And I'm not sure why, but he did. And so that's suspicious, first off. Why cut away? Why not show it? Well, you don't show it because, maybe we don't want him to be dead.
Well, because I don't, maybe that's the last thing that ever happens to him consciously. In the Feast for Crows prologue, Pate, all he remembers is his last thought is of Rosie. We don't even go into what truly happens to him as he dies. He just hits the cobblestone and he tries to call out for help, but he can't. And his last thought is kind of like Jon in a sense, in Jon's final chapter in Dance. He doesn't feel the fourth knife. So it's one of those things where you don't really need to go into the death completely, since it's the point of view.
Sure, it's just suspicious that it happens twice. When we talk about Catelyn, Catelyn's chapter cuts off when the blade goes across her neck. And, later we hear that, they took her body and they dumped it in the river. And, then later the corpse washes up and Beric Dondarrion first Arya's Wolf Nymeria finds it, and then Beric Dondarrion finds it. And all of these things, we know what happens to her corpse, and then she's actually resurrected, so she's not really dead. So, there's that, or I'm trying to think of other characters that die, and then we kind of know what happens to them. Chet, pees his pants at the end of his prologue. I guess we don't see him die, and then later his dead body is around, or whatever. Or Cresson, gets poisoned and collapses and dies. And later we know that Cresson's dead. They talk about this. So it's just odd that we don't know the information around that period. And then a lot of things don't make sense about the death. Well, first off, like Dragonfire, the other times we saw people burned by dragons, their eyes exploded and they were burnt to a crisp right there. Like what's with this 3 days dying thing? Like since when is Dragonfire at such a low heat that you would die over 3 days versus just being incinerated all at once? Like that doesn't really make any sense.
That is true.
The second thing is leather. The whip is leather. Leather doesn't burn. Like that's the big myth. Like you can't burn leather. Like it, you know. In fact, and George R.R. Martin knows this. There's a scene in A Storm of Swords where Mance Rayder builds something called these turtles, where he they take like these boats and they cover them with skins and to deal with flaming arrows, and the arrows hit the skins and they don't start on fire because you can't burn leather. Like leather doesn't burn, so a leather whip shouldn't be burning. So there's all sorts of
but in the book it says it's on fire. Why is it on fire?
Because it's I think is that whips have to be oiled. I think the oil is on fire. And oil has a much lower burning heat than other things. And so I think what happened is that the whip caught on fire because it was covered with oil, and I think Quentyn thought he was on fire because he had oil on top of him. Now, I mean, look at it this way. Like, we know that flesh doesn't burn, right? And yet, on TV, we see people running around in flames. Now, we know why that is. They cover people with that fake fluid that allows it to burn, and then they run around and then they put them out, And so that's how you make a human being covered in flames for the movies. And so Quentyn sees himself on fire. Human beings are made of water. If you saw yourself on fire, you'd be so hot, like your body would have had to have been dried out of all of the water before it could ignite. And if the flame was that hot, you're dead. You're not seeing anything. So already, like, there's nothing realistic about him watching himself be on fire. You can't watch yourself be on fire, because if the fire were that hot to the point where your body would be on fire, you're dead. And so the only way that like human beings look like they're on fire or running around like in movies is when they're covered in oil, when they're covered with a burning fluid, which is what I think. I think it's oil from the whip got onto Quentyn, because leather doesn't burn, human beings don't burn. Like oil burns. So I think he's covered with burning oil.
Gotcha. So where is he?
Well,
if he's alive.
So there's this idea that there was a lot of foreshadowing done that the Tattered Prince has this cloak that makes him into the Tattered Prince. That he's actually a pretty boring-looking, nondescript individual of average height or whatever. That anybody could be the Tattered Prince if you threw on this cloak. And so there's this idea that, maybe the Tattered Prince was pretending to be one of the sellswords of the Windblown that had come with him. And, Quentyn had, swapped himself or something, or had escaped with the dragons or whatever, and is posing as the Tattered Prince or something, or that the person dying in the bed is actually the Tattered Prince, and that there's a joke, because the Barristan chapter opens with 3 days the prince lay dying, and that the joke is, yes, it's a prince, it's the Tattered Prince, not Quentyn Martell, that there's a joke in it.
That's clever.
Yeah. So then there's a lot of things that don't make sense. For instance, it was a maze to get down to the Dragon's Pit. The only reason they knew how to get there is because Quentyn is a smart guy and he memorized the way when he went down with Dany. And so everybody went down there, and they're all idiots. Like the Windblown, they're idiots. Garrus, not that smart. Archibald's okay. But they're found down there. How did the Windblown get out? So how did the dragons get out? Did they know their way through the maze? It was literally called the Labyrinth.
So Archibald and Garrus, they're both in on this?
Yes.
So why did they get captured?
Well, because they needed to have something. They have some sort of plan. I don't know what that plan is. But
Is it to sell the story that
the Quentyn's
Quentyn
dead.
really?
Yeah.
Yeah.
So they have a corpse, one of the windblown, that's burnt to not, that's the other thing, is you have the burning cut off, and then Archibald retells the story and he cuts it off, and then Quentyn's body is unrecognizable. And you're like, come on, like every moment of our story where there's an unrecognizable body, like people question whether it's the real body. Like Bran's body was unrecognizable, turned out not to be him. Dany receives these bones at the beginning of the Dance with Dragons and is like, how do we know that this is his daughter? She questions it. She says burnt bones, mean nothing. Mance Rayder is burnt and it's not really him. Like this happens all the time. There are these fake outs. It's the same when people are like, oh, at the end of the chapter, he was screaming. There is literally an Arya chapter that ends with an axe hit Arya in the head. That is literally how a chapter
Which
ends.
chapter is this? I don't even remember this.
She arrives at the Red Wedding. She's running away from the Red Wedding, and then an axe takes her in the back of the head. And you're like, oh God, she's dead. Well, no, because it was the blunt side of the axe that hit her and it knocked her out.
Right.
And you're like, oh, fucking come on. Fuck you. Now, you're trying to tell me that, like, that isn't more cheating than, anything than Quentyn, like that isn't more definitive killing someone than Quentyn. Like Arya taking, the chapter literally says that Arya took an axe to the back of the head. Had they ended the book there and she had no more chapters, and then, like, would people be like, well, I guess Arya's dead? Like it literally says that she took an axe to the back of the head. And then it's like, no, it turns out there's another Arya chapter in the book. And so it was the blunt side of the axe and it knocked her out. And it's like, oh God.
The one thing that always bothered me about the Marine storyline is there are too many characters, and a lot of them have incredibly weird names. But when the Siege of Marine starts, there's so many sellsword companies and so many generals, like on the Yunkish side.
Yeah.
There's so many like adversaries. Even Dany's council has like 14 guys.
Yeah.
It's like a whole thing. And then you have, sometimes for me, it's incredibly hard to like differentiate who's an enemy and who's not. Like, probably saying his name wrong.
Skahaz.
Yeah, and who's the real harpy and like Green Gray, like this whole thing. And even Barristan himself is like kind of sick of it as well. The Tattered Prince arriving, like, it's possible, and hopefully it's true that it really was the Tattered Prince that died, but it'd be so confusing come Winds of Winter and we see that Quentyn's alive and it was actually the Tattered Prince who died. So, overall, I guess we'll have to wait until Winds of Winter comes out, because it's, once again, Quentyn being alive. There's an interesting theory that he is alive, but a lot of people are always so up in arms against your theory here that he is.
It's funny that people get angry about it. Like, it's very clear that the option was written in. Like, I'm not saying I'm 100% that he's alive or that 100% that he's dead, but 100% George R.R. Martin left himself the option. That he purposely wrote it this way, giving himself the opportunity to bring back Quentyn if he wanted. Like, he wouldn't have put all of these clues without that. It's like I say, like writers, when they say, oh, but they never found a body. Well, I don't know if that character is ever going to come back when they say, oh, they never found the body. But the writers didn't want to paint themselves into the corner, and so they left themselves the option.
Right.
It's the opportunity for sequel. This is what he did. Now, so for people to be like, no, he's dead. Like, that is, it's just a wrong perspective. It's just incorrect. Like, I'm not saying he is 100%, but I'm saying there's no way to know definitively one way or the other because George R. R. Martin left himself that. He hasn't written that yet. So we don't know. But I don't know. I could talk forever about Quentyn, so we better move on to something else, or else this would be like a two hour video.